Hello, folks. Really great to have you with us. Welcome to this conversation about building back better for carers. My name is James Townsend, and I'm CEO of Mobilise. We are the tech startup by carers and for carers. We're working with local authorities and carer supporting organisations around the country to mobilise the knowledge, the wisdom, and the experience of the UK's 13.6 million unpaid carers. It's wonderful to have you with us for this conversation. This is part of a series of conversations where we're looking at the lessons that we can learn from the experience of carers throughout COVID and how we can build a positive vision for what the future for carers might be in the country. So thank you for being with us. I'm really pleased to have with us today Ed Davey. Ed is leader of the Liberal Democrats, but also, more importantly, perhaps, is a carer himself. So we're going to be talking to him about his experience as a carer and his vision for what we could be doing to build a better future for carers as well. As we go through, please do join in with your comments, questions. I will feed them to Ed as we're going along. And if you're watching on replay after the event, please do keep them coming in because we get a really valuable discussion coming in. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring in Ed. Hello, Ed. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
How are you today, Ed?
Really good. As in most days at the moment, I spend my life in front of Zoom working at home, which enables me to give my wife a bit of help with caring with the kids.
Well, we appreciate the time, particularly on a Thursday evening. So thank you for being with us. Ed, it's been a political week for carers in many regards because the budget has been a really key issue for carers. There's been a lot of chat on carer Twitter about carers allowance and so on. So I'm really pleased that you're able to bring a bit of a political perspective to this conversation. But before we get into all of that, I just want to ask a little bit about your background and what brought you to being leader of the Liberal Democrats and doing the work that you're doing today.
Oh, that's a long story, James. I know. I actually got involved in politics tangentially when I was much younger. I was an environmentalist. I'd read a book called Seeing Green by Jonathan Porritt. It was really into the environment, and then just knew that I really felt like I was a liberal as well. My instincts seemed to chime with the Liberal Democrats, and I ended up joining them back in 1989. Worked with them as an economics advisor, as economics was my thing, as well as the environment, and then worked for Paddy Ashdown when he was leader. Developed the policy of paying on income tax for education, if anyone remembers that, making education the big thing. And then I went and worked in the private sector. I was in business management consultant, and then I got elected in 1997. And stayed elected for 2 years ever since. You know, I'm delighted to have become the leader of the Liberal Democrats. You know, we've had some tough elections recently, but I think we can really grow. We're very strong in local government, really huge number of councillors involved in many local authorities around the country. And I'm keen to obviously build the party back up on whether that's the environment agenda, the education agenda, but also the health and care agenda, which means a lot to me personally.
Well, and so I was going to come on to that, Ed. Thank you, because one of the big things that you've spoken about is your personal experience of care, and you've kind of put that to the fore. And I wonder whether you can say a little bit about why the issue of care is so important to you and your family.
Well, now it's important because Emily and I, my wife and I, we have 2 wonderful children. A beautiful girl called Ellie, who's 7 and twists her father out a little finger. And then my wonderful boy John, who's 13. And John has some severe disabilities. He has an undiagnosed brain condition, an undiagnosed neurological condition. And the symptoms basically are he finds it extremely difficult to walk, can't really stand up by himself, and has huge difficulties talking, and he has some learning disabilities. So he's profoundly disabled. He needs sort of 24/7 care. And so that's a caring responsibility that my wife and I, with often, not always, but often support from outside, are able to manage. But I've been a carer for quite a lot of different times in my life. So when I was a kid. My dad died when I was 4, and then my mum became terminally ill when I was 12, and I nursed her with my brother as a young carer, and then she died when I was 15. And then I was looked after by my grandparents, my lovely nan and granddad, and granddad died, then my nana became frail, and I was the main carer for my grandmother for a long time, and now for my son. So whether it's my mum as a young carer, and my my middle age, and now my son, I've done quite a bit of caring. And you know, we've had some, you know, we've been fortunate in many ways, but I do know from the carers communities that I've been involved in and being constituency MP that many carers really struggle, and that's why I wanted to be a voice, because I just think politicians don't quite understand the how exhausted carers can be, how some of the bureaucracy that's put in the way of just them looking after their loved ones can be frustrating. So I just want to, you know, through my own experience, bring that to bear, talk to lots of carers, including through Mobilise, to try and raise the many issues that carers face every single day.
And there's a lot in there, and I think a lot of people have been really encouraged to hear that somebody with personal experience of caring is being able to give a voice for carers. So the issue of unpaid care is sort of quite regularly spoken about in politics if you're looking out for it, but it hasn't previously been quite such a high profile that you might expect for something that, for an experience that is so fundamental to the lives of millions of people. And I wonder, Ed, why do you think that carers are so often overlooked by political debate?
Well, I think there's several reasons. I think, first of all, there's a failure to understand how our society, our economy, our country actually relies on carers. And if we didn't have these carers, how difficult life would be. And I'd say, therefore, I don't think caring and carers are valued properly. And I think that there's a number of reasons for that. I think one of them, I'm going to be frank with you, is a lot of carers are women. Not all. I'm a man, I do a lot of caring. I know there are many men out there who do a lot of caring. But actually, if you look at the numbers, it's significantly a role that's played by women, and that has over the years. And therefore, I have to tell you, in our society, that women's work has not been valued as much as men. So I think there is a real reason why carers and caring haven't been valued in our political debate. I think there's another reason, which I think is a really critical reason about that we have to overcome. We have a wonderful NHS. You know, we're all deeply proud of the NHS that we built in our country. And boy, has it been brilliant during this pandemic. There's amazing staff and the vaccination delivery by the GPs. But some of the issues and challenges for the NHS, I think, are made far worse because the politics and government policy hasn't recognised the really key links between social care and the health service and unpaid carers and the health service. Because people's health doesn't stop when they leave hospital or they leave the health centre or their GP surgery. In many ways, that recovery, that rehabilitation, that overall well-being, whether it's for mental reasons or health reasons or whatever, starts when they come home or they go to the care home. And so the role of carers, be they professional or be they unpaid, in the health of our nation, I think is being dramatically underplayed. And we have to raise people's views about that link between health and care. And if we can get that, I think we can have a revolution and really completely change things. If we can value the caring role that so many people do, mostly unpaid, alongside the health role that we value so much in the NHS.
And there's a big part. I mean, you mentioned the importance of caring roles in recovery there, but I think there's also a big piece about preventative care. Yeah. So when people are stimulated, supported to live independently, they're getting the things that they need to be living a full life. we know that leads to better health outcomes and less dependency on the NHS. And I mean, there's a danger that we turn this conversation into a sort of transactional one, and I'm always slightly cautious about things like saying that the value of unpaid care is worth 120 billion or something, because I don't think anybody ever does it for the economic value. They do it because they really care about the person they love. So, but I think that's a really important piece. And Ed, I mean, one of the key features of this conversation is we're looking to learn lessons from the experience of COVID, and obviously some of that has been a really challenging experience, but we've learned some positives as well. What are the key takeaways that you're seeing in relation to carers over the past 12 months?
Well, there's a number of ways I can answer the question, both from my personal experience, my media community that I'm engaged with, but also the surveys that I've seen and the things I picked up. So from my own perspective, while we're very fortunate, the fact that we have access to fewer services, far fewer, get much less support, the fact that we can't give our son the exercise in swimming pool, for example, actually has quite a big impact on his health, his mental health, and our own lives. And it can be quite exhausting. But we're one of I consider ourselves fortunate. But but there's no doubt it's created. It's meant that there's an extra burden that goes on you. It's not a burden, but you just have to step up and get on with it, don't you? I think more widely, the surveys suggest, I think, two big things I pull out from. One is this fact that people are exhausted. Many carers and their loved ones have depended on services like daycare centres, many of which have closed. They've depended on people coming to the home it's either they've been able to in some cases, but sometimes not been able to. Of course, some carers have not wanted anyone to come to the home because their loved one has been shielding, and so they've just not been felt able to allow people the help in. So for a variety of reasons, and every case is different, of course, but for a variety of general reasons, I think carers have had a really tough time. They haven't had the breaks that they get, when their loved ones at a daycare centre, or they've got someone in, or a relative may be able to pop by. And so the impression I'm getting from the surveys is how exhausted and tired people are, which is why I'm saying the government needs to support local government and social care services so they can give carers the break that they need. Give carers a break, I think, is critical. And for some, not for all, there's been big financial issues where people haven't been able to go and work or work in the way they could, so they've just survived on other things, and that's not been enough. Some people have, because of not being able to go out and engage in earn little bits of extra money, they've had to survive on carers allowance, which is extraordinarily low. And unlike universal credit, which went up by £20 a week, hasn't gone up at all, which I've asked the Prime Minister twice about, and he still hasn't done anything about it. It does seem to me quite wrong that you increase something like universal credit, which I'm absolutely in favour of, but you don't increase carers allowance by the same. That doesn't really compute to me. I don't think it's fair. So I think carers have had a tough time, and I just think they always seem to be forgotten. So we had to campaign hard to get unpaid carers to be a priority in the vaccination priority list. And then even when they agreed to do it, they didn't tell anyone about it, and a lot of unpaid carers didn't realise that they could be vaccinated early, and their GPs and the local community didn't realise that unpaid carers had this extra priority. So there's been a number of issues in the pandemic which suggest to me that government just doesn't understand carers, and that shows to me we've got a lot of campaigning to make sure the issues that face carers every day are taken far more seriously.
And I think it will reassure you, I'm sure, that you're not the first person in this series of live streams to raise the issue of carers allowance. And I think there's a very clear expectation amongst carers that carers allowance is not working for a lot of people. I think well, I'd be really interested in the flip side of that experience. So you've flagged some of the things that have been real challenges. Are there any examples that you've seen that have shown for you what could be done, or how things could work, and responding in a way that we can really kind of learn from and take forward?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. We need to learn, because I think actually, because carers in caring can be such a positive experience, although the downsides we know about and we talk about, but actually being there for your loved one, developing that relationship is quite special. And so I think one should reflect on the positives. And I think actually technology has been a positive. I mean, I don't know about you, I'd never done Zoom before. And while I'm possibly doing too much Zoom at the moment, or equivalent other video conferencing platforms are available, I just think it's enabled us to socialize in ways that we weren't ever socializing before. And people who are stuck in their home, who aren't able to get out for whatever reason, actually can see other human beings. And while telephone, that very modern piece of technology, you can use that, and speaking to people is lovely. Actually, there's something nice about being able to see someone, and yeah, there's FaceTime and all that sort of stuff. But I think people have found these types of video conferencing to be quite a radical approach and different approach, and that and other use of technology, which Mobilise, for example, you're doing amazing work. That's why I'm very excited to come on with you. Your use of social media to bring carers together is another example of how we can use technology to innovate, to connect carers, so they can talk, so they can support each other, so they can engage with each other. And that probably wouldn't have happened without the pandemic. So I think that is a good side. I think there's one thing I'd focus on, which it may be that there will be some people in government, not just in the political side, but in the civil service side, who will see the links between health and care more than they did before. Because you remember, that's one thing I was saying a while ago, that I just think people haven't seen those links, and that's why care has been undervalued. I think there will be people who are really shocked about what happened in our care homes, and not just care homes for the elderly, but care homes for adults with learning disabilities and disabled people in general, where we've seen some horrific tragedies. And I think there's a possibility in that tragedy to just get over to people that you can't separate health and care. You just can't do that. And if we can bring them together, if after this pandemic people really understand how closely linked health and care are, then that could be one of the steps to really move this agenda to another level, and really recognize the value of caring and carers. Now, I think some of your listeners might think I'm being a bit wishful thinking, a bit optimistic, but well, that is a potential positive, and I think we should really recognize.
You're pulling me out of the independent interviewer role, because I do have an opinion on this, and that's I think related to what you're saying. So many people, so many families have had to have some quite difficult conversations about how they're supporting each other over the past 12 months, and it's been a sort of really pressurized environment for that kind of thing. I think that's driven the issue of care up the agenda, so that people are much more conscious of how the system works than perhaps previously. And if you're right, and that is then reflected at government level, then that has to be a positive thing. And I wonder, sorry.
It will only happen if we recognize there's a moment, because these moments come and go, and you can miss them, and they can go through your hands, and suddenly it's gone. So it's really important we do step up the campaigning about carers and do see those links, and not least because, as you said, there's been some pressure and there's been some difficult conversations had, and it's partly because some of the care that people have had to do has been so exhausting, and it's impacted the health of the carers. So one of the things that I'm sure you've seen and surveys suggest is that the physical and mental health of those doing the caring, the carers, in some cases, not for everybody, but in some cases, it's been hit. And then we really would be in a difficult downward spiral, because actually we depend on carers and on families looking after their loved ones. And that's why we need to support them if, the state is actually sensible, because if it doesn't, there's going to be a problem, because, you've got to then struggle to cope with the extra demands on the health service because you haven't looked after the carers.
And I think that ties in with Brenda's comment that we were just looking at there about the importance of society valuing people who are doing some of the toughest work. And I know thanks to everybody who's commenting in there. They're coming through as we go, and really valuable points. I want to move us on though, Ed, to think about the future and to your vision. So if we move 10 years into the future and we look back and we say, gosh, that was the real 10 years where we did some amazing stuff for unpaid carers, and we really transformed the situation. What would that look like? What could that be? And what would the steps be that you would want to see happening to achieve a better vision for carers?
Well, carers want to ensure, first of all, that the people they're caring for, whether they're a professional carer in a care home or their loved ones in their family, they want to ensure that they can do that job as well as possible. And that means both having the support, sometimes the breaks, sometimes a specialist coming in, and often that sometimes means that they are empowered to make more choices. And one of the things I like, and it's partly because of my liberal philosophy, is I want to empower the individuals to be able to make more choices themselves with their loved ones about the care support that they need. And so putting more power in the hands of the unpaid carers, I think, is a sort of direction of travel I'd like to go. So you're not always, being seen there begging, can I have this please, can I have that please? Actually, you're able to say, look, I've got this support package, this budget, whatever it is, and this is what I'm going to use. This is how I'm going to use it. And we saw that with support for people with physical disabilities, the independent living approach. And I think that's what carers want. They want to make sure that in their caring role, they can do that as well as possible. Now, partly about that is about their own freedom. So yes, it's a big rising carers allowance. That's important, but also enabling carers who can work, who want to work, who want to juggle their work and caring responsibilities, giving them more freedom and rights to do that. So I've got a draft piece of legislation which I've put forward, which would require employers to be forced to provide flexible working for carers. At the moment, a carer who's an employee can request flexible working, but over 50% of those requests are turned down. I want to make it a right for carers to have flexible working so they can manage that work and that caring responsibilities. And I think that would be great for carers and therefore great for the people they're looking after. So it's those sorts of things. There's financial things there, there's support care service, particularly on respite. And I would like to see technology used better and offered more, so that people can come together in different communities, be they in their local area, be they across the country, so they can support each other. I think that peer-to-peer support can be so important. And now we've got the means to do it. Let's do it.
Well, it's interesting. Again, I'm stepping out of the independent role here because I think it's really interesting what you described. That there's some legislative stuff that can happen. There's some government policy that can change, but there's also changes that need to come from employers and the way that they're supporting carers, and then there's also something for us in the tech sector to be thinking, well, how can we use these tools for this particular audience to meet the needs of carers? I think, I mean, on the point around choice that you make there, the fact that carers who very often find leaving the house difficult for a complex number of reasons are actually now able to engage in local government and attend council meetings via Zoom and so on. You know, that's a little shift, but it means that voices can be heard. We've had a question from Brenda. Would you support the reinstatement of respite for carers?
Brenda, you're going to have to ask me more difficult questions than that. The answer is yes. No doubt about it. Underlined. That has to happen. You're going to have to ask me more trickier ones.
So, and in order to make all of this happen, so you know, you describe a charming vision of how the future could be. What needs to happen in order to get us there? What are the steps that you want to see over the next 6 months, maybe, or ahead of the next general election, that would start to lay the foundations of making that progress?
Well, if we're going to really build it into the system, there needs to be a long-term strategy which has backing of legislative changes, financial changes, and indeed technology changes and changes within the wider society, be it in employers, be it in groups like yourself in the sort of third sector, if you like. So we have to have the holistic approach, quite a big approach, and I think it starts with a set of values which says caring should be valued more. It should have equality of status with healthcare, and once you start talking about seeing carers and caring on the same level as healthcare, then I think that changes the conversation. It changes the status in government policy, and by the way, would improve the health service and its ability to perform. That's quite important, by the way, because that unlocks a lot of money. The health service wastes money because the government hasn't invested in care. And I think if we just thought more rationally about this, we could really improve both sides. You know, there are people who are in hospital for a lot longer than they need to be because the care packages haven't been funded because local authorities haven't had the cash from government. And, you know, I'm told that there are literally billions of pounds that are wasted that could be redirected, and we could spend the money more intelligently. So that's why we need a big strategy. It can't just be piecemeal, a big long-term strategy. And we need the sort of laws I was talking about that help with employment. We need to see the extra resources in. Give you an example, because it can't just be law. I was involved with some Liberal Democrat colleagues in the Care Act 2014. My colleagues Paul Burstow and Norman Lamb, who were care ministers, were very, very engaged in the Care Act. And that created rights for carers, needs assessments that local authorities are supposed to undertake. The sad reality is so many carers don't get those needs assessments, even though they've got a right to one. So, you know, if we're going to think about the strategy long term, we've got to look and say, well, there are laws there that provide a very good framework for helping carers. Why aren't they being used? Is it because people don't know about them? Because local authorities don't want to spend the money, because they're not funded properly by the government? So there have been improvements in the legal rights of carers, but they've not been exercised and not been provided for. So that, again, that's what I mean. You've got to sit back and say, well, you know, what's there in the system? How can that be improved? Another point is there's so many great volunteer networks out there. So in my constituency, we have something called Kingston Carers Network, which is a voluntary sector body that provides care for young carers, for elderly carers looking after husbands and wives with dementia. You know, they cover the piece, all forms of carers and cared for, and they provide amazing support. Now, my impression is that not every area has that strong third sector voluntary network supporting people. So many do, but not enough. And maybe if we supported those types of organizations, they can do things that the local authority will never get around to doing. and it can really increase the quality of life for many people. So there isn't a silver bullet. There's a whole set of things, and that's why we need this, I think, quite overarching strategy with a determination to make sure that social care and caring and carers are valued just as much as our NHS colleagues and our friends and the wonderful people in the NHS.
Well, I think a big part of that is about making sure that carers are heard in the political space. And Ed, you're doing that personally, literally, making sure your voice is heard. And I know that Gwendolyn, for one, and I know others in our community really appreciate that sense of knowing that someone who's been through those hoops and been on that journey is representing that experience in the political discussion. Ed, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your input. Thank you for sharing it. Thanks to everybody who's been commenting in. We haven't had a chance to read all of them out, but they've been really valuable. So thank you. We're here as part of this series talking about building back better for carers every Thursday at 6 o'clock. Please do subscribe. It's either top right or top left. I can't remember which corner it's in, but there's a big red button to subscribe. And please do follow us on Twitter at Mobilise Care and join the conversation. It's really great to have you with us. Ed, thank you again, and wish you all the best with your work.
Great, thank you very much, and good luck to everybody. Let's keep campaigning together.